Extermination Protocol: The Last Survivors of Earth's Colony. Chapter 1. Red alert. The blaring alarms jolted me awake from my sleep pod, and I shot up, groggy and disoriented. Red lights flashed around me, casting everything in a sinister glow. The ship's anxious AI voice echoed in my earpiece. Red alert, red alert. All hands to battle stations. We are under attack. I scrambled out of the pod, feeling the rush of adrenaline flood my system. The gravity was wonky, and I stumbled, grabbing onto the metal rails for balance. My thoughts were a jumbled mess as I tried to remember my training. The ship rocked violently, and I heard distant explosions echoing throughout the hull. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. My eyes darted around the room as I realized I was the only one here. Where was everyone else? Had they already evacuated? Was I the last one? Come on, think. I muttered to myself, grabbing my gear. I had to get to the bridge, to figure out what was going on. As I ran down the corridors, the ship shuddered again, and I heard a scream from somewhere nearby. My heart raced faster as I reached a junction, and I saw a group of panicked crew members gathered around the emergency hatch. They were shoving and pushing, trying to open it. What's going on? I yelled, trying to make myself heard over the chaos. There's no time, man. We have to get out, someone screamed back at me. But I didn't want to leave. I had to know what was happening. I pushed my way through the crowd, using my body weight to help pry open the hatch. It finally gave way with a groan, and everyone tumbled outside. The sight that greeted me was surreal. We were hurtling through space, surrounded by debris and chunks of metal. We were under attack, and our once proud vessel was nothing more than a sitting target. Enemy ships swooped and spun around us, firing lasers and missiles. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I saw the massive explosion that rocked the ship's engine. My chest tightened as I realized our engines were lost, and we were dead in the water. I swallowed hard, my eyes darting around for any sign of escape pods. But the nearest one was all the way on the other side of the ship, through impossible obstacles. I knew what I had to do. I had to make a run for the bridge, to try and take control of the ship. We couldn't just sit here and wait to die. With a deep breath, I took off running, dodging debris and jumping over fallen crew members. The AI voice crackled in my ear again. Hull breached. Evacuation advised. Repeat, evacuation advised. But I wasn't going to give up. I had to save the ship, somehow. As I reached the bridge, I saw several enemy soldiers already inside. They were armed to the teeth, firing laser rifles at anything that moved. They hadn't seen me yet. I took a deep breath and charged, firing my own weapon in a desperate attempt to take them out. My pulse raced as I felt the heat of their lasers graze my skin, and I knew this was it. I was either going to die here or somehow, miraculously, survive. The battle raged on, and I fought with everything I had, determined to save my ship and my crew. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the odds were against us. The enemy ships were too numerous and too well armed, and we were outmatched. I could feel myself beginning to lose hope, as one by one, the rest of the crew abandoned ship, leaving me as the only one left to fight. But I wasn't going to go quietly. I would keep fighting until the very end, even if it was just me against an entire army. And with a final surge of adrenaline, I charged forward, my weapon blazing. Chapter 2. The Council meeting. The Council was in chaos. Representatives from all over the galaxy had gathered to discuss the recent attacks on the ships that were traveling through the sectors under their protection. The mood was tense, and everyone was trying to make their voices heard over each other. We can't just sit back and let these attacks continue. One representative shouted, slamming his fist on the table for emphasis. But what can we do? Another asked, her voice pleading. We don't even know who's behind these attacks, let alone how to stop them. I sat at the back of the room, watching the proceedings with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. I wasn't a member of the council, but I had been invited as a special guest due to my experiences in the recent ship attack. As the discussion continued, I found myself growing increasingly restless. These representatives were supposed to be the leaders of the galaxy, and yet they seemed so powerless to protect their own. Finally, the council's leader stood up, silencing the room with a raised hand. She was a tall, imposing figure, dressed in flowing robes of deep purple. "Silence," she commanded, her voice carrying easily over the murmurs. "We will find out who is behind these attacks, and we will put a stop to them. But we need to work together." There was a murmur of agreement from the other representatives, and the room fell silent again. "Our intelligence suggests that a single, powerful organization is behind these attacks," she continued, her eyes flashing with determination. "They are well funded and well equipped, and they have shown that they are not afraid to use violence." "What's our next move, then?" one representative asked, leaning forward in his seat. "We need to send a team to investigate," the leader said firmly. "Someone who can infiltrate this organization and get the intel we need to take them down." Several hands shot up, and there was a clamor of voices as people began to volunteer for the mission. But the leader held up a hand, silencing them again. "We need someone with experience," she said slowly, her eyes scanning the room. "Someone who has faced these kinds of threats before." All eyes turned to me, and for a moment, I felt a surge of panic. Me? I was just a pilot, a survivor of a single attack. What could I do against a well-organized, well-funded organization? But then something stirred within me, and I realized that this was my chance to make a difference. To take control of my own destiny, and to prove that I was more than just a survivor. "I'll do it," I said, standing up slowly. The leader nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Very well. We will provide you with everything you need to complete this mission. But be warned, this will not be easy." The room erupted into a cacophony of sound, with voices shouting out advice and warnings. But I tuned it all out, my mind already turning to the challenge ahead of me. With a deep breath, I walked out of the council chamber, ready to begin my new mission. Chapter 3. The battlefield. The sun beat down on the deserted planet, turning everything a relentless shade of red. The air was hot and dry, almost suffocating, and I could feel sweat running down my forehead and back. In the distance, I could see the enemy's fortress, towering up out of the sand like a monolith. It was heavily fortified, with walls that were seemingly impenetrable and towers that stretched up into the sky. I knew that breaching it would be an almost insurmountable task. But that was my mission, and nothing would deter me. I had trained for months, undergoing every kind of simulation and exercise that the council could throw at me. I was ready for this. As I approached the battlefield, I could see that the enemy was already preparing for me. Hundreds of soldiers were marching along the walls, patrolling and scanning the desert for any movement. And in the air, I saw dozens of aircraft darting and diving, their weapons trained on me. I swallowed nervously, feeling the weight of my mission settle like a stone in my stomach. But I didn't hesitate. I charged forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The first few minutes were a blur. I dodged and weaved, firing my weapon at any enemy that crossed my path. But their numbers were overwhelming, and I was quickly pinned down. My worst fears began to come to life as I heard the sound of their vehicles approaching. These weren't just ordinary cars, they were heavily armed, and they were coming right for me. I gritted my teeth, firing my weapon as fast as I could. But it wasn't enough. They were getting closer and closer. And then, just as I thought all was lost, I saw a figure sliding down a sand dune towards me. As they got closer, I recognized the uniform of the council, and I sighed with relief. Together, we fought our way through the enemy's defenses, taking out everything that crossed our path. The fortress was in sight, and I could feel my heart beginning to race with excitement. But it wasn't going to be easy. As we approached the fortress, we could see that the walls were far higher than we had thought. And the enemy soldiers manning the towers had powerful weapons that could decimate us in seconds. We took cover behind a nearby hill, planning our next move. We couldn't just walk up to the walls and hope to break through. But we needed a plan, and quickly. And then, as we were discussing our options, I saw something moving in the distance. It was a group of armored vehicles, making their way towards us. "What do we do?" my companion hissed, his eyes darting back and forth. "We improvise," I said, a grin spreading across my face. I charged forward, firing my weapon at the vehicles. They swerved to avoid me, and I used their distraction to leap onto one of them. For a moment, I was riding on top of the vehicle, firing down at the enemy soldiers below. And then, as the vehicle started to shake violently, I realized that I had made a mistake. I was out of control, and I had nothing to grip onto. And then, with a deep breath, I jumped. The fall was long and terrifying. But as I hit the ground, I knew that I had made a difference. I had diverted the enemy's attention, allowing my fellow council member to break through the walls and infiltrate the fortress. And that was the beginning of the end. Chapter 4. Betrayal. I had been on the mission for weeks, working tirelessly to gather information about the mysterious organization. I had made friends with some of their soldiers, pretending to be one of them. I had sneaked into their bases and stolen files that contained valuable intel. But something had been nagging at me for days. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like a gut feeling, a kind of intuition that warned me that danger was lurking around every corner. And then, one night, it happened. I was sitting in one of the enemy's barracks rooms, reading through some files I had stolen earlier that day. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Before I knew it, the door burst open, and I was surrounded by a group of enemy soldiers. They leveled their weapons at me, and I knew that this was it. I had been caught. "What's going on?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're under arrest," one of the soldiers said, his tone cold and clipped. "Under what charges?" I asked, trying to buy time. "Espionage," he spat out. "We know what you're up to. You've been working for the council from the start, haven't you?" I didn't know what to say. My mind was in a panic, racing through my options. I could try to fight my way out, but I knew that it was useless. There were too many of them, and they were too well armed. I looked around the room, trying to spot any kind of escape route. But it was no use. My fate had been sealed. As they led me away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of overwhelming betrayal. I had trusted these people, had lived among them as if I was one of their own. And they had turned on me, just like that. But I didn't give up hope. I knew that the council would come for me, would rescue me from this prison. And so I waited, biding my time and planning my escape. Days turned into weeks, and finally, my chance came. I overheard my captors discussing their plans to move me to a more secure facility. They had grown tired of waiting for the council to show up, and they were planning to dispose of me. I knew that this was it. I had to escape, no matter what the cost. And so, when the time came, I made my move. I fought like I had never fought before, using every skill and tactic that I had learned from my time in the council. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in gasps as I made my way through the prison. But as I stepped through the final door, I realized that my escape may have been too late. The enemy's leader was standing there, waiting for me, a grin on his face. Well, he said, his voice dripping with malicious glee. "You've been causing us quite the headache, haven't you? Trying to steal our information, infiltrate our ranks. You're a brave soul." I raised my weapon, trying to look as fierce as possible. But I knew that the odds were against me. "And now, you're going to pay for your betrayal," he continued, drawing his own weapon. But just as he was about to fire, there was a sudden explosion, and the room shook violently. The walls caved in, and debris rained down around us. For a moment, I was disoriented, my ears ringing from the blast. But then I saw a figure moving through the rubble, their body coated in dust and grime. It was one of my fellow council members, come to rescue me at last. And with a surge of relief, we both charged forward, weapons blazing. The battle was intense, but we were able to fight our way through the enemy's ranks, leaving a trail of destruction in our wake. And in the end, we emerged victorious, ready to take on the next challenge that awaited us. Chapter 5. The ultimate weapon. After the betrayal and the subsequent escape, the Council began to launch an all-out attack on the mysterious organization. Our intelligence had finally led us to their headquarters, deep in the heart of a remote planet. But the headquarters wasn't like anything we had ever seen before. It was massive, covering acres and acres of land. And when we finally breached the outer walls, we realized why. There it was, in the center of the compound, the ultimate weapon. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, a towering structure that gleamed in the sunlight. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, and I knew that we had to take it out before it could be used against us. The structure was heavily fortified, with hundreds of soldiers guarding it day and night. But we were determined. We had come too far to give up now. We spent days preparing, gathering our forces and planning our strategy. And finally, the day of the final assault arrived. We charged forward, our weapons blazing. The soldiers guarding the weapon put up a fierce fight, but we were able to break through their defenses. And then we saw it. The weapon itself, shining like a beacon of death. It towered above us, an ominous presence that filled us all with a sense of dread. We tried everything we could think of, throwing everything we had at it. But nothing seemed to work. The weapon was too powerful, too well protected. But then, as we were about to lose all hope, someone had an idea. It was a long shot, but it just might work. The plan was simple. Infiltrate the structure and plant explosive charges on the main support beams. If we could take out the main structure, the weapon would be rendered useless. I volunteered for the mission, knowing that it could be a one-way trip. But I was ready for it. I had come too far now to turn back. I slipped through the enemy lines, using every ounce of my training to remain undetected. When I finally reached the main control room, I knew that this was it. I planted the charges quickly and efficiently, all the while keeping an eye out for any guards or soldiers that might be lurking nearby. Finally, the charges were in place. I took a deep breath, knowing that the countdown had begun. And then I hit the detonator. The explosion was deafening, shaking the entire compound. I could see the walls crumbling around me, could feel the heat of the blast on my skin. But I was undeterred. I kept moving, fighting through the chaos and destruction, determined to make it out alive. And when I finally burst through the last of the debris, I knew that it was over. The weapon was destroyed, and the organization was in shambles. We had won. I looked around, surveying the wreckage of the compound. The enemy soldiers were retreating, fleeing in terror at the destruction we had wrought. But I was content. I knew that we had achieved something truly great. We had taken out the ultimate weapon, and in doing so, we had saved the galaxy. Chapter 6. The final stand. After our victory over the ultimate weapon, the Council thought that it was over. We had beaten the organization, destroyed their headquarters, and crippled their ability to wage war. But we were wrong. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Our intelligence had failed us, and we didn't realize that the organization had one final plan. And it was a plan that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. They had built a massive, planet-sized ship, capable of destroying entire planets with a single blast. And they were using it to target the most populated worlds in the galaxy. We had to act fast. We could see the ship looming in the sky, ready to unleash its destructive power. As we prepared for the final stand, I could feel the weight of the galaxy on my shoulders. We were the only ones who could stop this. We were the last hope. Our ships lifted off from the planet's surface, soaring towards the massive ship in the sky. The battle was fierce, but we were determined. We flew in close, firing everything we had at the ship. But our weapons were useless. We tried to board the ship, but it was too heavily guarded. We were outmatched, outnumbered, and outgunned. And then, just when we thought all hope was lost, we saw something miraculous. Another ship, heading straight towards us. It was a council ship, piloted by the legendary Admiral Kane, the best pilot in the galaxy. Admiral Kane's ship was an experimental vessel, armed with weapons that could take out the massive ship. But it was a suicide mission. They would have to fly in close, and detonate the ship's nuclear core, taking out the enemy ship, along with themselves. We watched as the Admiral's ship made it through the defenses, drawing the enemy ship's attention. And then, with a blinding flash, it was over. The enemy ship was destroyed, and Admiral Kane's ship was gone. We watched in awe as the massive ship exploded in a fireball, no longer a threat to the galaxy. The war was over, but at a great cost. As I looked around at my fellow council members, I realized that we had all been changed by this war. We had witnessed the worst that the galaxy had to offer, and we had emerged victorious, but scarred. We stood there in silence, watching the enemy's ship burn and explode into nothingness. But in that moment, I knew that we had done our duty. We had protected the galaxy, and we had come out on top. And as we flew back to our home planet, with a newfound sense of purpose, I knew that we would never forget the sacrifices that had been made along the way. The galaxy had been saved, and we were the ones who had done it. Chapter 7. New beginnings. After the war, the galaxy was left reeling. The destruction and chaos had left many planets in ruins, and it would take years to rebuild what had been lost. But amidst the turmoil, there was hope. The people of the galaxy had come together, united in their goal to rebuild and restore what had been destroyed. The Council had become the driving force behind this effort, spearheading the rebuilding efforts on many planets. We worked tirelessly, using the knowledge and resources we had at our disposal to help restore the galaxy to its former glory. As we traveled from planet to planet, we knew that our work was far from over. But even so, we couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what we had accomplished. The galaxy was no longer under threat. The enemy had been defeated, and the ultimate weapon had been destroyed. And yet, there was still so much work to be done. But even in the face of all this work, the people of the galaxy were filled with a renewed sense of hope. They had seen the best of what the galaxy had to offer, and they knew that they could overcome any challenge that lay ahead. And as I watched the stars blur past my window, I knew that we were embarking on a new beginning. A future filled with limitless possibilities and opportunities. It was a future that we had fought hard for, a future that we had earned through our bravery and determination. But more than that, it was a future that we would build together, united in our efforts to create a better, safer, and more prosperous galaxy. And as the ship soared towards our next destination, I knew that we were ready for whatever the future held. We would be the ones to make it happen, the ones who would bring about a new age of peace and prosperity. The galaxy may have been scarred by war, but we would not be daunted by the challenges that lay ahead. Together, we would move forward, building a brighter and better future for all those who called the galaxy home.